Hello, everyone. So we are getting people connected. People are signing on to audio. We have about 50 people registered for tonight. So we're going to give it a few minutes to get people all signed in. But for the most part, I'm going to get the PowerPoint at least up for right now. I want to welcome everybody to our community meeting for the Mendocino Transit Authority for the Short Range Transit Development Plan. We're excited to have you here tonight. My name's Katie DeMayo. Again, we have a lot of people still signing on to the program tonight, so we're going to give it a few minutes to get people on. But in the meantime, I just want to go over a couple of our Zoom instructions. I know we've all been in Zoom here now for a couple of years, but it's always good to have a little bit of a reminder. This meeting is being recorded tonight. The purpose being is that there's a lot of interest in this project, and we want to make sure that we have a meeting recording onto the website as soon as possible for anybody who has missed tonight. You will also might have noticed that you are muted upon entry when you came in. This is to help keep background noise down during the presentation. We have the chat box open during the entire time. I'm really going to encourage you guys to ask questions during the presentation, and then we have plenty of time both during the presentation and at the end to pause for some question and answers. We'll also be doing some friendly Zoom polls throughout the meeting tonight just to kind of get to know you. As if this was in an in-person meeting, we might be asking you some of these questions. So again, thank you so much for joining us. I want to just overview the program that you might see here tonight. So you're going to hear from Jacob, who's going to tell you a little bit about the Mendocino Transit Authority. We're going to tell you a little bit about this short range transit plan that we have been working on. And then our consultants here at LSC are going to overview what we've been doing so far with some previous outreach and an overview of some of the potential changes to some of the transit service. As I mentioned, we'll have plenty of time at the end for some question and answers, and then give you a wrap up, next steps, and where we're headed from here. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the speakers of tonight's program. Again, my name is Katie DeMayo with AIM Consulting. I'm helping with the public engagement. Jacob King is here, the Executive Director from the Mendocino Transit Authority. We have Genevieve Evans, Principal from LSC. And we have Claire Hutchins, a transportation planner from LSC as well. And so with that, I'm going to launch our first poll. So as I mentioned, if we were here in person, we'd really want to get to know you. And so on your screen here, you should see two questions that have popped up. First is, do you currently use the MTA service? Yes, no, put your comments in the box as well. And then where in Mendocino County do you spend most of your time? Is it Ukiah? Is it Willits? Are you from the rural inland? Maybe the coastal areas? And if you're from another area that's not listed, please feel free to put it in the chat box. And so I'm just going to pause here just for a few seconds. We have some responses coming in. And as soon, great. Oh, this is an interesting poll. Can't wait to share the results. All right, so I'm going to share the results really quickly, and you can see we have 82% that currently don't use the MTA service. So we're really excited to get you looped in and hopefully get some active users here. And then over half the room is from Ukiah, but we still have about 25% from the rural inland area. So again, great showing here tonight. And I'm excited to now pass the program over to Jacob and hear a little bit more about the Mendocino Transit Authority. Jacob?
Hi, thank you. I am Jacob King. Been with the agency for about 23 years now. As the executive director the last 3 years, we've been in Mendocino County since 1976. I guess you can see that on the screen here. We have fixed route, dial-a-ride service, and paratransit service. The dial-a-ride paratransit service in Ukiah and general public dial-a-ride service in Fort Bragg. We have an intercity route that goes in between Mendocino and Santa Rosa twice daily. And we are excited because we've been doing some work in zero emission. We have 2 zero emission vehicles running in the Willits area. This summer, we will have 3 in Fort Bragg and 1 here in the Ukiah area. That's the first phase of our zero emission. We are using smaller buses than what was generally seen before. We've gone to a shorter 35-foot coach, and some of our future purchases on our zero emission vehicles will be a little bit smaller as well. We've also gone to contactless payments here in the last year. We've been working with Caltrans and the Cal ITP program for fare modernization, and been working with them on doing this contactless payment system to make it easier for riding the bus instead of using physical money, being able to use your card or your mobile device to ride. And I think that's about it for me.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Jacob, for that introduction. So Jacob's job is to run MTA, which, as you saw from that map, is a big transit system. There's a lot of different types of transit services. We cover a large area. Our job is to help Jacob and work with Jacob and team to update the short-range transit plan. What we think of a short-range transit plan, it's kind of like a business plan for the transit agency. We look at, are there any ways that we can revise routes, serve new areas? Maybe there's areas that don't get a lot of ridership or people riding them. Maybe that's not cost effective. Make some tweaks, and then make some recommendations to better meet residents of Mendocino County and visitors as well. To do this, community input is a big part of the process. It's a big part of any planning process, but particularly for public transit. So that brings us to today. And we've had several touch points for public input so far, and started with onboard passenger surveys back in May. We like to do this because this really gets to who's riding the bus. We ride every run of MTA, and we pass out surveys, and we ask people, where are you going? Why? What changes would you like to see? So we got 272 responses there. We also did some on and off counts where people were getting on and off the bus, which is important when we look at changing routes. We want to know where the highly used stops are. And then this summer, Katie and team and everybody, and Jacob was there as well. We had a workshop in Ukiah. This is when we've completed the existing conditions review, where we'd looked at the demographics of the area. We'd looked at the performance stats that transit planners like to look at, how many trips, each route is carrying, how cost effective they are. And we presented this and we gathered input. Here are some of the things that we've seen to this point. Are most people like MTA? They rate it as an excellent service. So that's good to hear. And then when you think about drivers specifically, 80% of the results show that they like the friendliness of drivers. Trip purpose is something that's really important as transit planners. When we make changes, we want to know who's riding the bus, why. If you're going to work, you need to ride it, say, 5 days a week. But if you're just going to do shopping or personal errands, maybe it could be a little bit more sporadic. So here are the stats on that one. 28% of our survey respondents say they're going to work. And then another, 50%, not quite 50%, but are doing personal errands and shopping. And then another one that's on there, Mendocino College, was about 12%. As with respect to improvements that we might make, people who filled out our surveys thought that we should extend the hours of service. And you'll note this as we go through the presentation. These are some of the things we looked at: evening service, as well as the next one there, Saturday service or weekend service. And so what we have today is a list of potential service changes for MTA. These are not recommendations yet. These are just ideas that we've come up with. We've done a lot of analysis. We've, looked at this community input. We've looked at how many people are riding each route and all that, and we've come up with some potential options and done the math on how many trips we think it'll carry, how much money it will cost. And when it comes down to it, when we do end up making recommendations, we have to be fiscally constrained. And the MTA budget isn't expected to really expand much. So you'll see here, some of these alternatives might cost a lot of money. So it's probably not going to work, or if they do, we're going to have to make some other changes. So we're starting with Ukiah. So as some background, it seems like most of you are from Ukiah, so you're probably familiar with the services. But routes 7 and 9 serve Ukiah and do a pretty good job of that with half-hourly service and serving most, high activity centers around the city. However, one thing that we could potentially improve upon is if you're going from north to south, south to north, it takes you quite a bit longer on the bus than it would on a car. Obviously, it's going to take you longer, but could we improve upon that? So here we came up with an idea of, and that this is actually building on something that MTA has been playing with. We just played with it a little bit more, circulator loops. And it's the idea of having 4 different loops. As you'll see, they're all not technically loops, serving different parts of the city and then coming back to a focal main transfer point. In this scenario, we're saying it's the pear tree. We know that there is a whole nother study to find another transit center in Ukiah. That's a different study. And it would be easy to adjust these loops to serve that new transit center. In this scenario, we think that we could shorten some travel times, and all these buses, all these loops would meet at the same time, so you could easily transfer between one and the other. With the configuration here, we think we could serve some new areas that aren't served now, such as Manor Oaks and the Brush Street apartments. And we think this would increase ridership by maybe about 8 trips a day, which I think equates to about 2,600 a year. One of the downsides would be we're not serving Costco directly. We're going really close, but the current routes do. And on this figure here, you'll see the gray lines are the existing route and the colored lines are the proposed. So you can kind of see the differences. We also shorten up the distance so the bus only goes as far south as Jefferson Lane, not as Plant Road. But when we did our boarding and alighting counts, not as many boardings happen in that area. This would have a small increase to the operating budget, about $34,000. Another option, kind of big idea here, is microtransit. And this is the idea of bringing Uber to the public transit world. If you're not familiar with it, much like Uber, there would be an app that would have to be purchased and distributed, and you can download it on your phone, and you could call for a ride within the pink shaded area, which is most of Ukiah, during those particular service parameters, which are very similar to what we have for the fixed route today. And you can be expected that you could get a ride maybe within 30 minutes. Might be longer, might be less. With this way of providing service, you can access more homes because the bus would come to your curb and drop you off at whatever curb of where you are. However, if we just add this as is on top of what we have, it's got a pretty big price tag there. You can see $400,000. So we look at other options of combining this with other alternatives to make it more cost effective. And as we're going to the next slide, the one thing I'll say about microtransit is for those work trips that do need to go 5 days a week, sometimes microtransit isn't as nice because that would mean you'd have to call every day to get your ride versus for a fixed route, the bus is going to show up at a certain time. But for somebody, again, who's going shopping or has a little bit of flexibility, the bus can come to their door, which is nice. So under this next option, we have a kind of a combination of fixed route and microtransit, but we're streamlining the fixed route from what it is today. And we're reducing the number of buses to make it a little more cost effective. But we're hitting most of the high activity stops according to our boarding and alighting counts. And then again, you'd have the option to have curb to curb service within that same service area. We think there might be a small reduction in travel times when you're on the bus. And we think there'd be a a decent increase in ridership, about 17 trips a day. I think that equates to about 56 or 5,400 per year. The downside of this option is to make it cost effective, where we're saving, you know, on not quite 200,000, but somewhere close to that. We have to reduce the number of buses, which means our headwaves would be every 45 minutes instead of 30 minutes. So that's a big disadvantage there. But we have another idea. And this is actually something that Jacob has been thinking about as well. We kind of turn that a little bit. So microtransit, as we said, may not be for everybody. So this is still the same idea of a more express route. This gets even more express. We're just going up and down State Street with a little out and back to the transit center there, wherever the transit center ends up being. So if you're going up and down that State Street corridor, you get there pretty quickly, zip up and down. But if you need to go off of that corridor, you would have to call in advance for a ride, and we could still serve roughly that same area. Under this scenario, we would recommend that you make a reservation for your ride for a deviation up to 24 hours in advance, and you could have subscription service. So you could, you know, say for a week, I need a pickup at this point, which might make it more convenient for some. And at a minimum, you would probably need to call about 10, 15 minutes before the start of the run. So it wouldn't be quite as on demand as microtransit. We think this could increase ridership by about 1,200 a year, and it would have some reduction in operating costs as well. And I think I wrote that about 71,000. And so remember how in the surveys, people suggested more evening service. So we looked at that for in a lot of the areas. There's a couple ways you can do that in Ukiah with our existing fixed Route 9 service, or with this idea of microtransit. You probably wouldn't do the microtransit as a standalone just for the evening, not a big enough thing to purchase the technology and go through the whole marketing thing. And as you can see, the stats are pretty similar. Ridership and costs are fairly similar how you provide this service. One of the bigger challenges might be finding a bus driver, an additional shift to operate this. And we can go to the next one. Oh, Route 20, sorry. There we go. Route 20 goes, so we're moving up north a little bit here from Ukiah to Willits. Route 20 goes back and forth between that. So with our same theme, we looked at evening service and weekend service for Route 20. You can see the stats here on the evening service. It would equate to 1 additional round trip in the evening. So even though it's a 3-hour span, doesn't mean that there's 3 additional round trips. It would cost us a little bit, but it would add 1,600 trips. And Route 20 Saturday service, and we keep Saturday service off into the 10 to 4 range because that's when most people need to get places. That could cost about 40,000 and add about 1,200 trips. And again, we would have to worry about driver shifts. Okay, so that's our Ukiah alternatives. So I think Katie's going to set up a poll for us.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So yeah, we want to pause a little bit during the presentation and just ask a few questions. And so again, I'm going to launch our second poll here. And so our second poll, you can see the questions on the screen. We want to hear from you. Is microtransit a good solution for Ukiah? Would you use transit more with microtransit? And so we have a couple of options there. Do you maybe you currently do not use transit, but you would use microtransit. Maybe you currently do not use transit and you would not use microtransit. Maybe you currently do use transit and you would like to use microtransit, or you do use transit and you're not interested in microtransit. And then again, one of the more important questions is, do you agree with the potential changes here in Ukiah? And again, if you have any questions about the Ukiah services in general, feel free to put them into the chat box. And I have a quick question for Jacob before we go. Do you know of any of the information about the income levels of your riders? I was wondering, I don't know if we asked that during our survey.
Everybody. So from the bottom to the top.
Great. Always good to know. All right.
I can't remember if we asked that on our survey. We could look. Recently, we've been streamlining them to have fewer questions, and that question doesn't always make the cut.
Yeah. And then all right, let me share some of these results. So you can see that about 70% think that microtransit would be a good solution. We have about a mixed bag between people who would be interested in using some type of microtransit. And 11 out of 11 agree with some of the potential changes here in Ukiah. And so with that, I have a couple of questions in the chat box. And so, Eileen, I see you say that the slides might be getting too fast. We will make sure that all of these slides are a part of the meeting summary as well. And so a quick question. So Donald had a question. Why not keep some version of existing bus service and entice Lyft or Uber to provide micro service in addition with their already developed technology?
Yes, that is something that I feel like in the past we used to recommend that more. It's difficult. I don't know how, you can't count on Uber and Lyft to always be in a community. Jacob, do you have a sense? Are there quite a few Ubers in town?
I don't have a sense. I can tell you I know of at least 5. But that number could grow exponentially, and it could be a lot less at times. So I do not have a good sense.
Great. Carla asked a great question. I know it's something that a lot of transit agencies have been talking about. Do we anticipate being able to find additional drivers?
At some point, I should hope.
Right. And so I know we're going to be talking about that as part of our marketing strategy as well, is kind of how do we get some more drivers. It's something that I think every agency is kind of looking at right now.
It's a nationwide problem, yes.
It truly, truly is. And so that's the hope, is that we can get some great marketing materials and kind of advertise to some different people. You've got Jacob, who's a great story of a bus driver who's made it up to being an executive director. So hopefully we can inspire some people by his story as well. And then Craig, yeah, hopefully we can, I know you want some percentage of the riders in each category. I'm going to see if I can work with Jacob and see if we can dig into some of our survey results for that. All right, so with that, we're going to continue on to our next area, which I believe is Willits, and I'll be back here in just a few to ask some more questions. But please feel free to keep them into the chat box. We'll be here all night. Not all night, for a little bit longer.
Oh. And I'm going to hand it off to Claire to talk about Willits alternatives.
Yes, so Willits service alternatives, we can go to the next slide. Currently, Willits is served right with Route 1. It would be possible to replace Route 1 and instead serve Willits and Brook Trails with a combined microtransit service. A benefit of this is that Brook Trails is currently the largest community in Mendocino County that is not served by the MTA at this time. So this would expand service to a lot of people. This is also something, serving Brook Trails was a big focus in the recent MCOG rural inland study that we'll be talking about more as well. Based on boarding and alighting counts that we conducted in Willits for this study, as well as other passenger data, the service hours we would recommend are 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Brook Trails, given how far it is up the road and the dispersed road network up there, would be served in specific time windows each hour. So what this would call for is that you're using app technology like Uber, Lyft, and people traveling to from Brook Trails would be limited with their ride request to a certain window in each hour. This would free up the driver time to make those quicker trips within Willits and then not waste as much time going up the hill and down all day. An advantage of replacing Route 1 with this microtransit zone is we anticipate it would save money, operating funds, and add a bit of ridership, as well as provide more direct service, curb to curb or door to door for more residents. But as Genevieve mentioned earlier, it is less consistent. So people who rely on the bus to get to places at a specific time, microtransit gives you a window, but is not necessarily going to get you there at the time. We also looked at expanding Route 1 in Willits for the evening hours, adding about 2 additional round trips a day from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. So one run at 6:30, one run at 7:30. This was one of the most popular requests during the passenger survey and first public workshop. This would cost around $50,000 annually. That should say would add 2 round trips a day, not per year, but it would add around like 500 trips a year. As mentioned, this would change our driver shifts and scheduling, requiring additional staff, which is definitely a consideration given the nationwide driver shortage. Currently, Route 1 goes out to Sherwood Rancheria and back every run. For not a lot of ridership, this alternative would consider serving Sherwood Rancheria on demand. What this would call for is that people at the Rancheria could call MTA dispatch and schedule their pickup so that the bus would come out to get them on the next run. This would be Route 1 that would come out to get them. And then if someone needed to get dropped off at the Rancheria upon boarding, they would let the driver know and the driver could go out and drop them off. This would save around like $6,000 annually by improving travel time for all the other passengers, but also making the Sherwood Rancheria stop on demand for those folks who do board and alight there. It would probably be a neutral impact to ridership. So this would just be slight cost savings and no large impact to ridership overall. As Genevieve mentioned, Saturday service is one of the most popular, or expanded weekend service was one of the most popular requests that we heard during outreach. So we looked at running Route 1 on Saturdays from around 10 to 4. This would carry around 440 passenger trips a year and cost around $35,000 for operating funds. Willits and Brook Trails could also be served by microtransit on Saturdays, which would carry around 500 trips a year, but cost a bit more than route, just operating the fixed route. And both of these would require new driver shifts.
All right, I'm back for another quick little poll about Willits. If you have any questions or clarifying questions about what Claire just went over, feel free to put it in the chat box. But let me launch poll number 3 here, which again has a lot of the same questions from the first one. Is microtransit a good solution for Willits? Yes, no. Let's talk about it in the chat box. Would you currently use Willits more with microtransit? Again, the options, if maybe you currently do use transit and might make you use it more, use it less. And then again, the most important question, number 3, do you agree with these potential changes here in Willits? And so again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat box, but happy to see that people are responding to the poll. And again, thank you all for joining us tonight. We really, really appreciate it. Craig, we're hoping for right now, we're putting everything into the chat box during the presentation. We'll have plenty of time at the end for question and answers. And if we have time after that, we'll be able to answer any questions verbally as well. So it just depends on the time, but hopefully. All right. So I'm going to share the poll. So it looks we got about 80% of people think that microtransit would be a good solution for the Willits area. Most people would not either use transit or not interested in the microtransit, but it looks like it's about a split between 35 and 35 on each side. And then 90%, 9 out of 10 people agree with the potential changes here in Willits. So glad to see that. All right, and so with that, we're going to continue on to the rural inland services.
Yes, so I will give a shout out to the fact that MCOG recently completed a study about rural inland service transit options that LSC then took and analyzed what would the impacts of implementing those alternatives be. So information on that study is on the MCOG website, but we can go ahead. So Brook Trails is one of the communities that was studied for expanded transit service. One option that was recommended in the rural mobility study was operating a deviated fixed route to Brook Trails between Brook Trails and Willits. LSC looked at operating that service 2 round trips a day, 2 days a week. We believe that that would add around 800 trips per year for a cost of around $30,000. Another option for serving Brook Trails would be extending Route 1 up to Brook Trails for 2 trips a day. So 1 trip in the morning where people could get on the bus and head down to Willits, and then 1 trip in the afternoon where people could go back up from Willits to Brook Trails. That would add about 1,000 trips a year, but that ridership would really depend on whether the timing of those exact runs would work for people. The deviated fixed route, for instance, would give people the chance to make smaller trips, maybe more convenient for shopping or medical, versus the extension of Route 1 would be better for going to school or work or full day trip purposes. So the ridership would likely depend on what people need to get to Willits for on the bus. The Route 1 extension would not have deviations, while the deviated fixed route would do up to 3 deviations per trip off of the route to get closer to people's homes. Those deviations would be pre-scheduled with MTA. As noted earlier, also Brook Trails could be served with that microtransit zone that we discussed with Willits. So a few options for serving Brook Trails. Another community that is discussed in the rural mobility study is Covelo. The option that was recommended in that study is to implement a deviated fixed route service to Willits. That the MTA is actually already planning a pilot for this, so this will be happening next year. It will be a 1-day-a-week service from Covelo to Willits. We anticipate that this is going to add around 200 trips a year for a cost of around $45,000. And it will require an additional driver vehicle, but that will be shared with this Laytonville pilot service as well, which is discussed on the next slide. So that other Covelo service will be 1 day a week, and the Laytonville service will be another day a week, likely the same driver and the same vehicle. So that this will provide the same kind of deviated fixed route service from Laytonville to Willits. It will add about 400 trips a year and around $41,000 in costs. I guess I forgot to say, but the deviated fixed route aspect of these services will be, the bus will go and pick people up near their homes if they've pre-scheduled a pickup, but there will be a central stop where people can also go if they have not scheduled a reservation. And then the bus can also do scheduled drop-offs in Willits before having their layover and then going back at the end of the day. So a mix of that microtransit fixed route service schedule, but still able to accommodate people who don't have reservations as well, with a posted schedule. Hopland, which is south of Ukiah, the option that was recommended in the mobility study was to increase the frequency of Route 65 service, as Hopland is already served by Route 65. Doing 2 additional round trips a day, 3 days a week, just between Hopland and Ukiah, would likely increase MTA ridership by around 200 trips a year, and would cost around $35,000. Potter Valley is the last community that was looked at in the rural study. One what we LSC analyzed was, could Potter Valley also have a similar service to the service that's being operated for Covelo and Laytonville, which is a deviated fixed route 1 day a week, except that bus would go to Ukiah. We believe this would add around only 100 trips a year, and around a cost of $30,000. But should be noted that the mobility study recommended at this time that this type of service be operated by the Family Resource Center community van, based on demand and community needs, and that the MTA and MCOG and Potter Valley can reevaluate in a few years to see if they believe that the deviated fixed route is the better option as well. So there's two options there.
Thank you so much, Claire. We have a very quick poll on this one. Really, it is just, let me launch it. It's a 1-question poll. Oh, wait. It won't launch. Weird. Hold on. Time out. Oh, there it is. Hold on. Okay, now I can launch it. Do you agree with the proposed changes for the inland area? Yes or no? We saw a lot of comments in the chat box. Awesome Covelo service and restoration of LV service. So again, looks like when you can see me share it, we have 92%, 11 out of 12 of our voters do agree with the proposed changes here for the inland services. So that's great to see. All right, so let me stop sharing this poll. And I believe we are on to our last alternatives.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're making our way over to the coast. Last but not least, starting with Fort Bragg, we actually had an in-person public meeting there on Tuesday. So it was nice to visit there. We had some good input from the folks there. Route 65 is a really long route. It goes all the way from Santa Rosa and it's Fort Bragg and even down to Mendocino on some of the runs. And the way the route was designed, probably for efficiency because the buses are based out of Fort Bragg, was to have it so that if say you're coming from Willits and you're going to Fort Bragg, but you don't live close to the I want to say Boatworks. Is that right? No, that's not. Boatyard, excuse me. Thank you. The Boatyard stop right at the edge of town in Fort Bragg. The bus stops there, but then it hangs a left and goes to Mendocino and comes back and then serves the rest of Fort Bragg. So probably most of our ridership wants to spend more time in Fort Bragg. So we thought about swapping the schedules. This is actually the northbound schedule, so that Willits and Fort Bragg are served more consecutively. We think this would increase ridership a little bit because people wouldn't have the extra time going to Mendocino on either end. There would be a little bit more deadhead travel, which means this is a time when there's not a fare paying passenger on board. So there'd be some extra hours heading down to start the service in Mendocino in the morning and then come up through Fort Bragg. However, we think overall that this would have a little bit of a increase in ridership, but with also a little bit of increase in costs. One thing we need to note for all of Route 65 options, and something we talked a little bit about at the Fort Bragg workshop, is Humboldt Transit Authority is putting together an intercity service called Redwood Coast Express, which is that RCX you're saying. And this service will connect with other public transit services. So in theory, you would be able to take a trip from Smith River way up north all the way to the Bay Area, one way in 1 day. And Route 65 would be a part of this link. So we need to make sure and coordinate with this service that I believe is happening pretty soon. I think we can go to the next one. All right, weekend service comes into play in Fort Bragg. Since we have so many visitors in Fort Bragg, we looked at both Saturday and Sunday service for that main time frame, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we think it could add about 800 trips a year on Saturdays and maybe 600 on Sundays. Typically Sundays is less than Saturdays, and typically Saturdays is less than weekdays. But we think we could get this much ridership given what the data we have. And we think it would cost about $31,000 in additional operating subsidy for each of those options. And of course, there's the finding the driver problem. We just need to note that. And one thing I'll note is, so as Jacob mentioned, there's a general public dial-a-ride in Fort Bragg. And what we could, if we're doing some of these other microtransit options in other parts of the county, you have to purchase this technology, and there's some initial setup costs, which are pretty significant. And then on top of that, it's about $4,500 per vehicle to have this technology. So if we're doing that already, it might make sense to include an extra $4,500 for the Fort Bragg vehicles. I think there might actually be 2 vehicles sometimes that are used for the dial-a-ride. And this would, might attract some visitors in Fort Bragg, that are used to using Uber if they're coming from the Bay Area or whatnot. They might find this appealing to have a phone technology instead of calling dial-a-ride. And so it could increase ridership through convenience of technology. However, if we're not going to do microtransit somewhere else, we're probably not going to implement it just for this. And here's our poll.
All right, I promise this is our last poll. We have 2 questions here. Let me launch them. And we have, so the first question is do you agree with streamlining Route 65 to Fort Bragg? Yes, no, feel free to put some comments or concerns into the chat box. And then the second is, do you agree with weekend service in Fort Bragg? And so while, yes.
And can I just answer someone's question that they submitted about the Redwood Coast Express is going to go from Eureka up in Humboldt County to Ukiah. And then the service to Sonoma County, for you all in Mendocino County, the journey is still the same, where it's Route 65 from Ukiah to Sonoma County. And then you can transfer, I believe, to Smart trains in Santa Rosa and get to the Bay Area. So
it's multiple public transit operators.
The new service is between Eureka and Ukiah, not Ukiah in the Bay Area, actually.
Right. Thank you, Claire.
Absolutely. And I'm going to share the poll results. We got 91%, 10 out of 11 people do agree with streamlining the Route 65 to Fort Bragg. And 100%, 10 out of 10 agree with the weekend service in Fort Bragg. So like to see that. And with that, I believe we're onto our marketing or capital needs.
Capital options, yes. So it's not as sexy perhaps as they say, but it's important to maintain the infrastructure of your transit system. And that's part of the purpose of a short range transit plan. We need to make sure we're replacing vehicles at the right time so they don't need a lot of excessive maintenance. And we also want to make sure we're replacing with the right size vehicle if conditions have changed. So we want to make sure that the vehicle size relates to the number of passengers on board. And the big thing these days is zero emission vehicles. There's mandates through the state, the California Air Resources Board. They would like to see all public transit fleets zero emission by 2040. And there's some mandates as to what types of vehicles you can purchase beginning in a couple years. So MTA is going to start transitioning to zero emission battery electric buses. And of course, charging infrastructure comes into play with that. There's a lot of challenges. How far can battery electric buses go? They cost more. But this is something that MTA is working on. There's a separate plan that discusses this. We just need to make sure we're consistent with this and this particular plan. And it also requires some upgrades to the facility to make sure that we can have the right charging equipment. Speaking of the MTA facility in Ukiah, the operations and maintenance side looks great. We saw that when we were down there, but the administrative side, It's, this small older building. So there's a lot of improvements that could be made there that we should keep in our plan. We also need to be consistent with the Ukiah Transit Center, how that works out, as well as bus stop improvements. So this is, do we need more shelters or benches? And we should be continually making sure that bus stops are signed. And if we're changing our routes, that, are those stops still signed, or is there a stop that doesn't exist anymore? And I think we have some fare alternatives also. We often do a review of a transit agency's fare system, and we compare it to similar types of service systems to see if you're on par. Are we charging too much, too little? And we think we're in the ballpark there. So that's good. Jacob mentioned the contactless payment technology is something that's coming about and on our vehicles. This is, great so that you don't have to fumble for cash. So this is something you'll see more to come about that. If you look on the MTA website, particularly for Route 65, and you want to know how much it's going to cost to go from, say, Willits to Santa Rosa, it's a pretty complicated or not large table of the different prices depending on how far you're going, which makes sense, right? It should cost more if you're going farther. But it can be a little complicated, and drivers might have to figure out on the bus how much to charge, so it can add a little extra time. So we looked at ways of simplifying fares for MTA, and we go from extreme to less extreme. The first one there is the extreme option, and that's one fare for everything. Maybe it's $1.50 wherever you want to go. And so we did a little bit of a kind of a ballpark analysis of, if you're charging $1.50 to go to Santa Rosa, you're probably gonna get more people riding the bus, but you're not getting as much money from it. So we think under that option, ridership would increase by 7%, but fare revenue would go down by 9%. A mid-range option is to have 3 fare categories. One for your local routes, like within Willits, within Ukiah, an inner city, so between Ukiah and Willits, and then interregional. This is when we're going a long ways to like Santa Rosa. And we can come up with prices for those. And we think that would have a less drastic of an effect, increasing ridership by 2%, and fare revenue would go down by 4%. We also have some recommendations to just kind of collapse some of those fare options to make it just a little bit easier to follow, but they wouldn't have a significant impact one way or the other on ridership or fare revenue. And then I think we have a few marketing recommendations, kind of standard things, upkeep with signs on bus stops, make sure they're kept up. Do we need more shelters, benches? Website improvements, we're recommending for schedules. It might be nice, particularly for people who don't live in the area, to identify the community for those routes that go through multiple communities, so you know where Denny's is and whatnot. Developing a rider's guide that could be distributed is one way of a good marketing strategy. Continuing with the travel training program, so that's the idea of folks that may be able to use a fixed route or a bus, but are a little wary of doing it by themselves. They can get some guidance on that. Upkeep of social media. It's always good to market specifically to students. Mendocino College, there's a fair agreement with Mendocino College, get more students riding the bus, especially, and high school students even, and you have future transit riders. And regional collaboration. And this is something that MTA does since they connect with other services to make sure that other services are aware of any changes to your service. So I think we're moving on to next. Is it at this point, Katie, should I talk about the memos and
if you want to mention it really quickly before we go into the question and answers, but then we've got a couple of questions in the chat box we can go through.
Okay. So I'll just let you know, at this point, we've put together 2 memos, one on the existing conditions, one on the surveys. They are available on that website you see here. We're also, AIM is in the process of developing another an interactive website that will have this 3rd memo that is really close to being done. It's rather beefy, which is why the reason we have this presentation today, to give you a high-level overview of these different options. And then if you really are interested, and we will answer some of your questions now, but if you really want to get into how did we come up with those numbers? Why did we come up with this option? There'll be a whole 60-page document you could look at, and you can go through and find where you're looking for. So we're hoping that this is going to be available on Monday. And I'm going to send out notifications when that is available. I just wanted to make sure that was, everybody's aware of that.
And since you guys all signed up via Zoom and via, Eventbrite for the meeting on Tuesday, we'll be able to email you guys all out the meeting summaries and when all of this is available. And so with that, I'm going to go back to a few of the questions that we have received into our chat box. I know Claire has been answering a few of them, but Craig did ask a little bit more about the Uber services. Does MTA have any, or not about the Uber services, but does MTA have any other data, potentially maybe from some other transit authorities, about the utilization of transit authorities microtransit in areas where there is higher Uber or Lyft utilization?
What kind of data are you looking for?
I think they're looking in related to Lyft or Uber. Does MTA have any data from other transit authorities in places that have high utilization with Uber or Lyft? How does microtransit work, or how effective is it?
So we do have data about microtransit ridership in Sacramento, which I believe has probably more Ubers per capita compared to Ukiah. Just assuming but we have looked at that. These programs have been very successful even in major cities. I don't know, though, if we have data about how that compares to actual Uber utilization rates.
Got it. Absolutely. Yeah. So Barbara asked about Anderson Valley. She sees that it's not included. Will it be? Weekend buses to the coast would be much appreciated, is her comment.
We have not looked at Anderson Valley specifically. That is something we can give a look at. Absolutely.
And again, that's why we're here tonight, is to see what we might have been missing and see what we can look into. Michael asked a question. Jacob answered, but I just want to clarify. Will RDX be daily and stop in Laytonville? And Jacob responded, yes, both north and south. And then Donald asked a great question that we hear a lot with microtransit. So with microtransit, how do we handle people who are, for whatever reason, don't have a smartphone? A related problem, maybe wireless service in Ukiah isn't so great. So although it might be possible to order a ride, is there ever any trouble with that? And Claire was able to answer that people will still be able to call to dispatch a ride, similar to the current dial-a-ride services. Mm-hmm. And then Eileen asked, will there be stops along the way from Potter Valley to Ukiah?
I don't believe so. Right? Yeah. I think it's just more of a lifeline service to get to Ukiah.
Great.
Right, Claire?
Yeah, pickups in Potter Valley, pickups in Ukiah, but just driving between the two communities was the vision for that.
Great. Gotten some comments in the chat box about some of the solutions and proposed changes. And again, these are just proposed changes. So again, we still want to hear from you. So again, if you've missed anything, if there's any other questions, again, we're going to be here on the line at least for the next 5 or 10 minutes in case anyone needs anything. But if you would like to raise your hand and ask us a question, you can raise your hand, put some more questions into the chat box. But we just want to make sure that we're available to answer any other questions that you might have about some of these proposed alternatives. So Donald's asking about a ride to Talmadge. And is anything proposed, or is anything existing, maybe, Jacob, right now in that area?
We have the paratransit dial-a-ride in Talmadge.
Got it.
And nothing here I've seen tonight has done anything for Talmadge, no.
Right. We haven't addressed anything specifically for that community other than what's currently there.
Got it. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for right now. And Craig, I know you're trying to raise your hand, so let me see if I can get you to unmute yourself. Hold on one second. You should be able to unmute yourself now. Hi, Craig.
Hi. So thank you for this presentation. My name's Craig Schlatter. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Ukiah. And, I wanted to just make a few kind of short comments here from the city's perspective, especially from a planning standpoint. We really want to encourage compact, dense development and towards that end, limit or disincentivize sprawl. For this reason, definitely more transit options in Ukiah are very important. We also need to make sure that we have adequate transit close to residential development. And there was an early slide that showed the Brush Street Triangle. And I think it was one of your options, maybe it was option number 1 that had the new route potentially going along Brush Street to North State Street and then onto the college. That would be something we would be very supportive of. There's a tremendous amount of new housing construction on Brush Street, as I'm sure everyone knows. In addition to that, the city, this is in our 2040 general plan, that we intend to annex the entire Brush Street Triangle. And so if we don't have transit along that route, it's going to be difficult from a number of perspectives. One being that future affordable housing will be more challenging to be developed there without those needed grant points for transit located within a half mile of residential. It also may encourage more use of the automobile to reach that neighborhood, and probably what will be in the future a growing neighborhood. So I just wanted to voice our preference for that, especially that Brush Street route. I think that also will be highly utilized in the future by your riders. And thank you so much.
And Craig, if I can just kind of address some of that. So we do have 2 bus stops there on Brush Street, and pre-pandemic through the Ukiah Traffic Engineering Committee, we did get the route approved that would serve Oak Manor and Brush Street. But then the pandemic obviously happened. We haven't been able to get our driver pool up, but we do have a route that does serve Brush Street. So we will probably see that in the summer.
Great, thank you.
And thank you, Craig. There was a great question from Susan. Is night service from Mendocino College being considered? Some students taking night classes are sometimes stuck without a way home. Something that we had talked about Tuesday was serving some of the college students. And Claire answered, yes, we're looking at either extending Route 9 service from 6 to 11 or running an evening microtransit service.
And that time frame was recommended to us by Jacob based on what MTA has heard regarding college, the college schedule.
And history. Basically, we do have a route that does also serve the Mendocino College in the evening. Once again, the pandemic kind of put a kibosh on it for now, but it is we are planning on going back up to the college as soon as we can drive her up.
Great. All right. So again, if there's any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. But I just want to say really thank you, everybody, for joining us. We had a great turnout to our meeting on Tuesday night. We had a great turnout tonight. Lots of people responding to all of our outreach. But please stay in touch. We'll be emailing you out both the meeting summary as well as soon as the draft plan website is ready on where to access that. Again, the meeting recording for this should be up onto the website here in the next week or so. So if you know any neighbors or community members who would like to watch it, feel free to send them to the website and we can watch this. Susan is trying to raise her hand. So let me see if I can get you just unmuted real quick, Susan. It should be in your toolbox, but hi, Susan.
Yes, thank you. So I have a few questions and comments. Just my disclaimer, I should say that I'm a member. I'm on the MTA board as the City of Ukiah City Council representative. So I want to say that I'm very encouraged by the possibility of microtransit. There's been a lot of chatter about it, and it seems like it's much better suited to rural areas like ours than to have routes that aren't necessarily popular. But I'm wondering, and I can go through all my questions at once or take them one at a time, whatever suits you. What size buses are being considered for microtransit? Would it be minivans or the dial-a-ride size buses as opposed to the great big ones? That's one question. Maybe I'll just go through these very quickly. Like Craig said, also, I'm glad to see that Brush Street will be considered again for transit. There are a lot of low-income housing units, and that would be a great opportunity to increase ridership. I mentioned the college night classes. I saw, and it was mentioned a few times, that Oak Manor would be added, and I understand that Oak Manor had service several years ago, and several neighbors had complained about the amount of buses going through their neighborhood. So that service was actually discontinued I believe about 5 years ago. I went to the community forum last summer, and I, as well as several other people, brought up the issue of the sizes of the buses. And there's, a lot of comments I hear as a city council member that there are very big buses going through Ukiah with very few passengers on them. So the big buses are being underutilized. And there's a call that I hear pretty consistently to replace the big buses with the small buses. And that would include, I'm very glad to see the gradual replacement of the diesel buses with electric, but I'd like to see them be the smaller, possibly the 3/4 size buses or half size, which would be much cheaper than purchasing great big electric buses. I think those are all my questions and comments. This was very interesting and informative. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Susan. And I think do we know the size buses, Genevieve, that we're recommending?
I think typically for microtransit, it is a smaller vehicle.
It needs to be a van or a smaller vehicle, because one of the benefits is it could go down private to people's homes. And obviously full-size buses can't make every turn on every back road to get to the different neighborhoods we would be proposing for service. So that it would need to be a smaller vehicle. The report is going to include an analysis of the vehicle sizes needed for the different routes based off of boarding counts. One of the goals with buying vehicles is that you're also not trying to leave people on the street because you went too small. So we are looking at what is the size that, based off of the maximum load that we saw, what size is needed to carry those people. It's not assuming that ridership will quadruple from this point necessarily in the next year because of COVID returns. It'd be great if ridership quadruples eventually, but I don't think that's the jump we're making. We are assuming, though, that ridership will still come back a little bit. But I will say, having done that analysis, it is not recommended to have full-size buses on every MTA route. It's only a few of them that have the ridership to merit big buses. So I know MTA also has their ZEB plan that they've put together, so that will include more mid-size vehicles are being looked at as well as small-size vehicles. Very few of the routes actually need the big bus.
But I think Route 9 is one of them that does need the bigger bus.
Yes. Based on what we were saying, that is what we would recommend, because students also utilize it as a means of transportation for field trips and such. And one of the goals of transit is to accommodate the public, and it's great that it can be used as this resource. And the goal is probably not to leave half the the class.
No, absolutely. And it looks like Milton, who lives here, and I see
one more point. I'm sorry. One more point. We've never, MTA has never gone to Oak Manor in the 47 years history. So that was not true. So I just need to point that out.
no worries. And it looks like Milton lives there and has no problem with any buses going through his neighborhood right now. Steve, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. Oh, I think you actually, oh, Steve, you're still muted. I'm trying to. You should be prompted.
Yes. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't know the computer.
Fine.
So I lost track for a second. So my question is the bike racks. I noticed a lot of people, and it seems a lot of people have e-bikes now, and it's one of the biggest and largest modes of new transportation around the world, from what I understand. Are some of the bike racks, are they going to be able to accommodate e-bikes, and how many? And also, I think the rails to trails might be coming here too. So we might be seeing a lot more bicycle traffic. And I just was wondering if that has been considered as far as doing routes on the weekend from Cloverdale to Hopland, like a small route through that space where the trail won't be able to make it through.
It's a great question, Steve. Genevieve, do you know anything about the bike racks on the buses, and if
I might defer to Jacob on if there's bike racks on all the buses. That would be, don't know that actually.
Yes, every one of our regular fixed route and intercity bus does have bike racks. And we also, here in Mendocino, allow bicycles to be stored in the wheelchair securement area if the bike rack is full, with the caveat that if a wheelchair does board, then the bicycle has to get off the bus. We don't kick the passenger off, but unfortunately we have to kick the bicycle off.
And can the bike racks handle a 50-pound e-bike?
We do have a number of e-bikes that do work and a number of e-bikes that don't. The unfortunate part about e-bikes is they do have a battery inside of them. So if they don't work on the rack, we can't take them in the bus.
And are there any planned routes from Cloverdale to Hopland on the weekend, as far as like a shuttle, if the rails to trails does come to our area?
That has not been considered specifically. We just looked at more of a lifeline service from Hopland to Ukiah to get, not for recreational purposes, but for other purposes.
Okay, that I'd like to make a suggestion that be looked at in the future. We also may need a hop-off point from Redwood Valley to Willits, seeing that the rails to trails will be flat all the way from Hopland through to Redwood Valley. Now, there will be another stopping point at that point. One more, because I'm from Redwood Valley and I've been working with the fire department, I'd like to also just remind you, if as the thinking in the future comes forward, that we may need to utilize the bus service for emergency tsunami evacuation, and also for emergency evacuations for any other earthquakes, and so that should come also when you're looking at the size of the buses when you're purchasing them. We may need your help in moving a lot of people from one space to another in a really quick fashion.
Hey, Gizmo, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Gizmo, by the way. Everybody call me Gizmo, please. Thank you.
There you go, Gizmo. So we do work with Cali OES, also the Office of Emergency Services here in Mendocino County. In 2017 fires, we were helping out with some of the evacuations. And yes, the size of the bus was very important at that time, especially since we were set up to evacuate the hospitals in case they needed to be evacuated. So that would have definitely been a problem if we were using the smaller vehicles. So that's a very good point.
I'd like to just, without taking too much more time, since there is going to be an issue with bus drivers, I noticed that Cummins diesel vehicles just got a civil lawsuit, and when the Volkswagen lawsuit went through, there was $7.7 billion set aside in that lawsuit for public transit. So with the new Cummins diesel lawsuit that has just been settled, there may be a lot of money out there to help increase the salaries for the drivers here in the area. And I will be attending the February 5th meeting of the MCOG to present a small plan on going after grants for the MTA. So I'm in your corner, Jacob.
Thanks. I'll be watching for that.
Thank you so much, Steve. Those are great comments.
Gizmo, please.
Oh, Gizmo. So sorry.
Mondo. Yes, thank you. You can unmute. Those are my comments. Thank you, folks.
Really appreciate you attending here tonight. Thank you so much. All right, we got 2 more questions in the chat box. Is it true that we can put some... Jacob, do you allow folding bikes on your bus, like folding e-bikes?
So in the bus itself, if it has certain ones, yes. If it's a closed system, yes. If it isn't, or if there's any damage to the system, no. And we've ran across both, so it's kind of that's a great question. Thank you.
Got it. And then Milton asked, is there funds in the Cummins litigation for the remediation of the vehicles affected? Not really sure about that. Not sure. But we'll definitely look into it. And so again, we'll include all of these questions, comments, concerns into our meeting summary here tonight. We really thank you. Oh, you're responding to the commenter. Thanks, Milton. And again, we really appreciate everybody's responses through all of our engagement, whether it's on the passenger surveys, the community surveys, the first workshop, the workshop Tuesday, the workshop tonight, and the future engagement to come. Really appreciate it. It's really important that we hear from all of you all. So again, thank you guys so much. Please stay in touch, and we will be in communication as things start to roll out here over the next couple weeks. And with that, I will say,
everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Have
Thank
a
you,
great night. Happy 2024. See you all soon.